I really enjoyed the like monotonous drone in the background. I think sometimes we think about, oh, games have to be fun every moment, but sometimes the fantasy fulfillment of just like, I'm in this really boring technical job sells a lot, even though you're like, oh, we should have cool music. It's like, no, like we should have boring, like grinding noise. So that was really good, put me in that space a lot. Some of the text, especially in the tutorials, were way too small. Needs to be bigger, more readable. But I loved the diegetic UI you were using, where you're actually looking at a panel in the world, and there's sort of like, you don't have just like some bar that's like, here's your heat, but you actually have to look around and balance your attention all over the room. That was really good, and I think that's something really core to what you're doing, is this like keeping multiple plates spinning thing going on. The sound was really good. There was a very palpable sense of tension, which I think was really, really great in that spot. And I was kind of continually chuckling to myself as you're doing all this balancing stuff. I would have loved to see more, like the city being more expressive. Like my goal is to somehow like keep the lights on, or you know, like emergency services. So at least just like a simple picture of a city,
yeah,
with
like a map.
Yeah, like a map with like bars in it, be like, oh, the suburbs are low. I'd also like to see a little bit better rhythm. It seemed like you had this very like flat interest curve. Having like a day-night cycle where it's like at nighttime power consumption goes way up, or maybe, I don't know, whatever, however cities work. And then I may have this sense of like, oh, I need to like throttle down and burn my resources to make it through the like 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. and then from midnight to 3 a.m. I can recover and like get ahead again. I didn't see that happening in the game. It might under the hood, but I would really love to see those kind of pacing changes, because you do have so many elements of like repairing the generators where you really want the player to be thinking about, how do I spend these resources, and also like what actually are the resources I have available to spend, because things like generator health, often there's sort of this abstracted resource that it's like, it's not your first intuition to be like, oh yeah, I'm gonna let that go lower, right? Because health should be at 100 or whatever. But I think making those player discoveries of like, I can spend some generator time, or like, I should be cycling them would be interesting. Like if a generator at 200% is actually producing 3 times as much energy, but wearing itself out twice as fast, like those are some really interesting choices. Like maybe I should always have one off being repaired and then running all the others overtime. That would make the pacing a lot more interesting. But yeah, good job.
Thank you. Yeah, there were some really neat stuff going on. Whether or not you actually intended it, there was a really funny commentary that was kind of going on between doing this kind of complicated and somewhat monotonous job and also trying to stay sane. The in-world art and just kind of the manner in which you have to navigate the space in order to do things was pretty neat, actually. I mean, there's a lot of indie games that you see kind of tackle these concepts of a character interacting in a world and you're dealing with these rules, but what does it mean for the character, his or herself? It seems so complicated, though, that I had really no idea necessarily how all this stuff worked, and maybe, for a first-time player, kind of failing a lot and figuring these things out can be very entertaining. But like, if you decided to pursue the idea a little bit more, it might be kind of funny to have a bit of a narrative wrapper where it's like, hey, this is your first day on the job, you're fresh out of, nuclear engineer school or something like that, and, first you're kind of doing a lot of mundane things and learning, and then the guy just goes home one day and leaves you there all alone. You have to kind of make all this stuff work. Like, there's a lot, I think, that you've built that really has some interesting opportunities. So I think if you wanted to just keep drilling at it and adding little layers, while also at least trying to ease the player actually into the mechanics of the game and the rules of what you're doing and why it matters and what the outcome of failure and success is. Like obviously the screens when you win or lose are pretty funny, but maybe, like he had said, if there was a little bit more of a connection between what your actions are actually impacting. Really love the sound effects, though, and just the whole idea behind it was really, really clever.
Thank you.
I'll say, I want to start with something a little different that really is a note kind of for all of the teams and maybe for their instructors too, is that, Kaylin, I appreciated when you started that you talked about our team, right? I didn't hear any my or me or I or what I did, I heard what we did. And I think that shows. I think it says something about a team, like in a very team-oriented industry, to kind of remember that it's a group coming together to make a vision happen. And then I'd make an assumption here, but like if that's the dynamic that you guys have, like it really seems like a lot of people came together to make a lot of stuff happen. Like there's a lot of math going on up there, like to make those different things go. Is there any actual science going on there? Like did you guys do some research on nuclear decay and whatnot?
You can thank Nico. He's very, very knowledgeable in this kind of stuff, and he kind of helped guide us through it is actually how a real nuclear reactor powers things, just obviously simplified.
That's awesome. So totally cool there. And then another part about the presentation was it's like your presentation was so like kind of nicely and well scripted as you sort of went through it all, but it's like I think when you're playing the game, you'd be a little more panicked and trying to figure out what it is.
Yeah.
Like that's part of it, right? So that you're like you weren't panicked at all, so it was like hard to see like what was going on both ways. So definitely cool. Like I think what Eric said about like being able to understand the strategy of it a little bit, like what are these different things that I could do? I think as we were playing it and actually had the help screens. A little bit to what Bobby said too, like that you could really leverage those help screens. Like we didn't get to see what they all say, but to understand like how they would fit into that bigger picture of what the game is. It feels like something you can play a bunch of different times, especially if we were talking about having like day-night cycles or different times. It's like things that would be like different challenges and different ways to address them. The cool thing about it though is like in a very short project, you put all of those elements there. So like all of that stuff is there for you to play with and figure out how to do it. It's not like you have to make anything else. It's just kind of putting it in the context. So really, really nicely done. That's super fun, like kind of funny.
Thank you.